Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and we're here today with Valerie Stuart. Valerie has lived in West Brattleboro for the last 25 years. She's a marketing and communications consultant. She's also been our state rep for 8 years. So today, welcome Valerie.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Thanks for having me.
I'm delighted
to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
So I think I was looking through the notes that I made talking to you.
Sure.
And I think it's very interesting that as a kid, you actually spent a lot of time in the South and a lot of time in the Northeast.
Yeah.
And if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, Wendy, my parents got divorced when I was 7 years old, and they lived in Virginia at the time, Fairfax, Virginia, actually. And my mother, when they got divorced, it was a terrible divorce and acrimonious till the end of my mother's life, to tell you the truth. She was quite bitter about it all. Anyway, that's a whole nother story, but the long and the short of it is, she was the custodial parent, and she moved to where her family had lived and where she grew up, which was Mamaroneck, New York. So right after, they got divorced, we moved to Mamaroneck, New York, and she had her mother there and a couple of sisters and that sort of thing. So we just moved back near her family, which made sense. And then we visited and spent time on my dad's. My dad moved rapidly out of Fairfax, which was growing by leaps and bounds because of the, military industrial complex that
this is Virginia.
Is Washington. Well, Washington just kept spreading out, kind of like, Paris and other places have. So the long and the short of it is, he moved further and further out. First, he moved to Oakton, Virginia, which we used to ride through where is now Dulles Airport in Reston, Virginia.
You used to ride on a horse?
On horses.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's
when I was a little kid,
yeah,
we had little ponies and horses, and every Sunday we would go for a trail ride through the woods. And then we saw Dulles rising. And
that's exciting.
So it's, but anyway, it was an interesting life, and I was around all sorts of interesting people. My father had very interesting
Now, he was an Air Force guy, right?
Yeah, my dad was an Air Force guy. He grew up dirt poor in White Plains, New York. He lived in a two-bedroom walk-up above a pizza place.
Oh, wow.
Vaqueros, it's still there. It's near the county center. And the long and the short of it is, he and his brother John and my grandmother, who was a cook and a maid for wealthy people, because she was off the boat from Scotland. So my dad is a self-made man, grew up dirt poor, went to Cornell on the GI Bill, and ultimately, he did very well as a veterinarian.
He's a vet, yeah.
He always loved animals. And this is interesting. One of my interesting connections to Vermont, Wendy, is I had a number of aunts who settled in Victory, the last town in Vermont that received electricity.
Oh, wow. I've never even heard of Victory.
It's up near St. Johnsbury.
Yeah, way up. Yeah.
And it was, they had no electricity. They had an outhouse. My Aunt Jessie, my great Aunt Jessie, she lived to be 95, and she survived lockjaw, which is like unheard of, and she got it from a rusty farm tool. So, anyway, interesting stories, but my dad and mom were very interesting people. They met in White Plains, New York, when she was going to Grasslands to become a nurse, and, so.
So she raised you, and she was a nurse, and
she raised us, she was a nurse. It was really hard for her. She had 4 children alone.
4 children alone, a single mom, 4
kids. She
kids.
worked all the time.
Yep. And I would think between your mom as a nurse and your dad as a vet, you probably got a little bit of interest in helping people or helping animals?
No question. I mean, I love people and I love animals. They're 2 things that have really enriched my life and always been a big part of my life. My dad, he tells stories about as a small boy, he would find a bird with a broken wing and try to, he was just, my dad to this day, he's incredibly kind. He was a beloved vet. I mean, everyone adored him, and he had a great practice because he was so good with people and so good with animals and so honest and, he really took good care of, and you know how fond people are of their pets.
Yes, that's right.
But my dad, when he moved to Oakton, and then later he moved to the Plains, Virginia, we were on a farm, 4 children. There weren't other kids around, so we amused ourselves. And I watched things like Biography, the Watergate hearings, and then we had all sorts of political discussions every night. My stepmother's brothers one of them was drafted, and he went off to the Vietnam War, and he came back forever changed by what he saw, and he drove a car around Washington and that said "Stop the War." It was spray painted, and he smoked marijuana to the end of his days, and he once, he went there as a, he was drafted, but he was a Marine, so he wanted to, do a noble thing, but he found the war is not so noble. And one of the best stories about him, I'll just tell you real quick, is it was during Johnson's body count wars. And this guy is he's one of my icons, one of the reasons I got into politics. His name is Mark Bowman, and the helicopter landed, and there were a bunch of wounded soldiers, his fellow soldiers, and they were going to leave him because they were injured. And that was part of the body count wars. We could say we lost more guys, so therefore we could use more firepower, et cetera. And anyway, so he pulled out his gun and he put it next to the pilot's head, and he said, they're leaving or you ain't leaving.
Wow.
And so they put him in and they flew him out. And he and his brother went to all the anti-war marches in Washington. And
when he got back.
When he got back, exactly.
So he was a voice.
And that brother, Mark, they set up homeless shelters all over Washington. And because a lot of the, vets had PTSD and we didn't deal with them as a nation.
That's right, we didn't know how to. But I could see where that could be very formatory for you.
It was very, 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 formative, for sure.
Both politically and also, you have that also back with your parents being caring people. So when you were in college, I'm not sure if it was during college or during the summers, you did a lot of traveling.
Yeah, well, a lot of it actually was after college. During, what was it? Gosh, was it my freshman year of college? I met the man who's my husband now. He went to St. Lawrence University, and I was visiting there, and I it was like love at first sight. I saw him, I fell madly in love with him kind of from afar, but we were friends for years and corresponded and that sort of thing. So my husband and I did lots of travel after college, but I did live in Madrid, Spain, my junior year of college, so maybe that's what you're thinking of course. Yeah, so my stepmother, one of the best things she ever said is, you should live abroad, Valerie. What a great opportunity for a young person. And, this is my stepmother really who didn't even finish college herself. She was very traditional. She was the oldest girl and had 4 brothers, 3 of whom became chiropractors. But anyway, and the father was a chiropractor, but she was a traditional one. So, but she just thought it would be neat for me to go live somewhere, and she thought Spain was a cool country. So, and so I went and I lived in Spain for a year, and I have to tell you that absolutely changed my life.
In what way?
Well, it was right after Franco. So 40 years of Franco. It was in the years right after, the dictator who basically, he reigned in that country for 40 years.
Yes.
So it was a very interesting time, and I learned a lot about politics and about politics in Europe and about particularly politics in Spain. And anyway, all of Europe, went through the war, and it was terrible and memorable for people. And so it was really interesting to be there. And plus, I loved, it was international. I went to school at some place called the International Institute. It was a former little embassy, and it was the sweetest place, and it had a garden. And I speak Spanish and I speak French, but I learned the Spanish there. I did a double major because I decided that, when I was in college, I just wanted to enlighten myself as, much as I could. So I read as many books as I could. And so I was a English literature and a Spanish major. So I did most of my Spanish major while I lived in Spain. But
and so when you went to Madrid, that served you well, and you were able to really get around and enjoy. Did you see a lot of art? What kind of things
Everything.
did you do?
I'm a total art person. My father and my stepmother brought us to museums all the time in Washington, D.C. They did lots of cultural things with us, and the folk festival in Washington and all the museums, and I just always loved museums. And, my stepmother was a great cook, and she always had these wonderful dinner parties with interesting people who were doing a lot of interesting things in Washington. So yes, one of the most interesting classes I loved was an art history class, and it took place in the Prado.
Oh, wonderful.
And those are some of the greatest painters.
What a great experience.
Yeah,
that's
Velázquez
really
and Bosch, and all of them were influenced by the Venetian school.
Yes,
but
and
anyway.
I would think to be in Madrid during that time
would
certainly affect you in terms of the political landscape and really being imbued in it.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, actually, political change is tricky because a lot of people, they didn't want too much change.
Right.
Spain is a very conservative Catholic country, and there are good things and bad about conservative. And but anyway, so it was interesting.
Yes. And you
very elegant people, the Spanish. Very elegant and very fun-loving and warm. And I love Latin people.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And then you went to South America as well.
And then I went to South America. I actually thought for a while about becoming an expert or doing something in international affairs. I thought about going to Columbia University in New York, but I ended up getting a great job, so I didn't end up doing that.
So in South America, where were you traveling?
I went, Wendy, to visit a gal who I had met in Madrid, Spain, and so I went to visit her in Uruguay, and she and I and some other gals, we went to Uruguay. From Uruguay, we took a bus and we went to Brazil and Argentina, which was really. And I had always wanted to do the Orient Express, but I didn't make the full Orient Express. But I made those 3 countries
That's
and
not bad.
visited a great, Amalia Fernandez Wolf. She was in Madrid visiting her sister, who had moved there because there weren't many men in Uruguay anymore, because during the war they all left and fought, and so there were more women than men. So anyway,
that's really interesting. And then you went to New York City. You got a job in the city.
I got a job in the city. My first job, I was the associate editor of a graphic design magazine, and I wanted to be in communications, so it's like I ended up right where I wanted to be.
Yes.
56 in Park. It was it was called Graphic Design USA, and it was a trade magazine that went to art directors, graphic designers, industrial designers, and so I, covered press conferences, and I went to the Art Directors Club Awards and the Society of Illustrators. It was cool.
Oh, it sounds wonderful.
I would walk down Park Ave. I thought I was Marlo Thomas. Did you ever watch that, girl? Well, because I would take at that point I lived in Westchester still. I had a little teeny apartment in Larchmont, New York by myself, and so I would I'd come into Grand Central and walk down Park Avenue.
And you could hear the music rolling behind you,
exactly.
right?
I'd go have my coffee and read my paper at a local diner. Exactly. It was fun.
That's great.
Really exciting times.
And you were there for a little while, and then you came up to Brattleboro, up to Vermont?
I worked in the sequence really goes, it's a little confusing, but 4 years at the Graphic Design magazine. Then I went to South America for a couple months to visit my friend. Between jobs, I wanted to get out of publishing because they used to call publishing the velvet ghetto. It was from like velvet gloves because it was heavily populated by women and therefore, of course, terribly underpaid. And so I decided I was going to get out of that kind of communications and into something else that was, I'm a self-made person, so I needed to make money. So I went away to South America for a couple months, and then when I came back, I got a really even better job, much better.
In New York City?
Much better, yes. And that one was 46 in Lexington, and that was, I was the partner in charge of marketing at a big design firm, PR and marketing.
And so somewhere around there you got married,
I did that 10 years. Well, actually, my husband, he had gone off to Bar Harbor and done this Special Olympics after he was like working with them. He's a really outdoorsy guy and he, Eagle Scout and all that kind of good stuff, but always been very outdoorsy. And so he went up to Bar Harbor to work for a while, and then he had just come back, and that's when we got romantic, and he decided to go to law school. So he went to law school in New York. I helped put him through law school. I used to remind him about that. I don't anymore. We've been together for
this has been a while.
But anyway, so we've been together really for 38 years.
Yes.
And
So did he have a hankering to get back into the country? Was that how you ended in?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. He worked at a law firm on the end of Park Avenue. He worked at one in Wall Street. He worked on one in 6. Ed Koch's firm was one of his last places. And he also worked at HarperCollins, a publishing company, as assistant general counsel, or general counsel rather. But the long and the short of it is, I mean, and we came up to Vermont all the time to ski, to mountain bike. And once we had babies, we didn't want the long commute to get to the country when we wouldn't see our kids, we wouldn't see them at breakfast, we wouldn't see them at dinner. And that is what a lot of people, I mean, I have a brother-in-law and a sister-in-law. They live in Larchmont. He's a doctor, she's a producer for NBC. They're, it's a choice you make. They have a great life. It's just not the choice we made. We wanted a different life.
It's a different life. And so when you got here, this was back in '94, I think, that you came to Brattleboro, and you started having a couple kids, and you were doing...
No, we had a 1 and a 3-year-old when
already.
we came. That was hard.
Yes,
No
little kids.
childcare, no family.
Yep.
We started over.
Early days, yeah. And but you started a little communications business?
I did. I actually kept my job in New York for a while, interestingly enough. And I would go down there like once a month and that sort of thing, and they kept me on part-time.
So early telecommuting.
Yeah, it was. But telecommuting then and
Very
telecommuting.
different.
And I had an office in the Hooker Dunham building.
Yeah.
It was just a little closet, but Leo Berman, that fabulous
Yes,
man, was
yes.
my sweet landlord.
Yeah.
I loved him so much. And I loved the building and everything, but it just, I had a 1 and a 3-year-old,
Yeah,
a husband
right.
who worked all the time. And I'm a very determined person, but you know, there's only so many hours in the day.
That's right. And so once you sort of came out from under that,
Yes.
some of your first accounts were pretty great.
Yeah, well, I got one of the great projects I got was, something. Since I saw, Wendy, what happened to farmland in Virginia, I always worry about the earth. I'm, a big climate action solution person, and climate change is one of my top issues as a legislator, and I've done some pretty cool stuff with that. But the long and the short of it is I worked on this great project for the Student Conservation Association, which is based in Charlestown, New Hampshire. They have a fabulous mission, which is to send young people out into the woods for trail building and they learn to work as a team and they learn skills and all of that in the national parks. And then they also train people to be, they're not docents, they use another word, interpreters in the national parks. And so it's just this great, and these are high school kids, go out for 3 weeks. So I did a PR project which basically was funded by LL Bean, and LL Bean wanted some good PR in their catalog, and so we did these 3 events called Earthwork Events, and those events were in Seattle, Washington, Washington, D.C., and where else? Oh, right in New Hampshire, Manchester, New Hampshire area. So it was just, so I was in charge of the PR, getting the cameras there, getting the PR people there, getting the only problem with that one was Mayor Barry, he had his little cocaine problem.
And mayor of?
Washington, D.C.
DC.
He had a cocaine problem, so it took away some of the cameras from the big day. But we did stuff like clean up the C&O Canal, urban gardens. They had a program for people of color to urban gardens, take these neighborhoods.
That's so great.
And this was in 94.
90s. Yeah, right.
This wasn't 2015.
Yeah.
So it was one of the
Those are great
most
days.
exciting things I have ever done. I did it for 6 months. It was really pretty full time, and I had given up the New York client and that sort of thing.
And then you moved into youth services, is that correct?
And then, then I got a job at youth services, which was a great thing because I was actually able to do what I had always wanted to do here in Vermont, which is mission-driven work. So I felt so good about working with the board, raising money.
Right.
Youth services is a great organization to this day.
Yes, it is.
They've always had great people on the board, great programs, great staff, and they help so many. And
and kids go there.
Kids
That's what's
go
wonderful.
there,
Yeah,
and
kids,
it's about young, life.
Yeah, it's great.
The future is, young. It's about children and young people, and
Yeah, always has been. Probably always will be.
exactly. Yeah.
And then you did a little arts work too at Brattleboro Museum and Arts Center.
I was on that board for 13 years, Wendy, and actually Donna Borofsky, who's involved with the museum to this day, she met me at a party and she was like, "You need to get on the museum board," because she knew I was artsy and creative person and liked that kind of thing. And so I was on the board for 13 years, and I ended up being board president, and we actually brought Andy Warhol, a blockbuster.
That was a big show.
14,000 people.
That was amazing.
I was talking to Lynn Barrett the other day. Lynn is also, Lynn, she does that beautiful Southern Vermont magazine, that fabulous. I mean,
So Vermont.
She's so talented, and so she helped me with the TV part on that and filming things and, setting up some of the big PR stuff. But, we got international coverage.
Yeah, that was huge. That was a wonderful thing for the town.
And we did a Studio 54 party, and Lynn was saying, nothing's been quite like that.
Yeah.
I also brought the first creative economy conference to the museum, the concept for it. Konstantin von Krusenstern, he was the director, but I was the board president, and he ran with that idea. I had researched that there was some stuff like that going on in Massachusetts, and I was trying to show the town and Windham County how we could make the arts how important the arts are. And as you probably well know, Vermont has more artists per capita than any other state in the union. So the creative economy, and now the legislature is all over it. I reported a bill on the creative network, and it's about linking all the different creative nodes, or whatever you want to call them, all across Vermont, so that travelers who come to the state, it's a big asset. We have the lovely landscape, the environment, and then we have this great arts.
Yes, and many art venues as well, large and small.
Exactly, and those have grown by leaps and bounds as well. So,
and you did a little bit with Vermont Performance Labs as well, right?
Yeah, I was on their advisory board. I mean, the advisory board was really never asked to do much, so I really, I couldn't claim credit for anything other than, I was complimented that Sarah invited me to be on the advisory board, and I think she's done a great job. And
they do some very exciting things as well. Yeah,
but,
and you've also done a lot of. You've been on other boards. Yeah, you've done local fundraising for business and nonprofits.
Yeah. Well, I did. I've had various. I did different projects. I mean, I did projects for the Brattleboro Savings and Loan was a good client. So was Fleming. Fleming Oil. And then I did a little bit of work for the hospital. I did some work for HCRS, Healthcare and Rehabilitation Services. I've done work for the Vermont Land Trust that I'm very proud of. And I worked for the Strolling of the Heifers. Now that was, I did that for 4 years. It was like a part-time job.
Which would now probably be a mammothly full-time job, right?
Absolutely.
There's something that's grown by leaps and bounds.
Orly's done a great job, and anybody who can turn the river garden, into a great. So she's just, kudos to her and her team.
That's a big force in our community.
Yes,
a really big force.
So I've worked on, a lot of the things, and with a lot of the people that have done these things, and that gives me great. I mean, John and I moved here to be part of a community. We wanted our children to be part of a community.
Yes.
We wanted to raise our family in a place where you are part of something. We have a very vibrant West Brattleboro Association.
Oh, good.
And it takes a village to raise a child, and it takes, a couple of great hard-driving community members so we have, Michael Bosworth, I mean, he and Stuart McDermott and Joe Jewett and Barbara Gentry. There are a number of people in West Brattleboro. And I was one of the founding members who went to a lot of those before I became a legislator, because I could see that there's potential in West Brattleboro, but it went through that bad stage that a lot of Vermont towns go, into unless someone brings them back.
Yes, and I think the flooding helped to exacerbate that. And,
no question.
And also, the road coming through with more tourists. I think that made a really big difference in terms of that area.
Yes.
So you have, as we've mentioned, for the last 8 years, you've been our state rep from West Brat.
Yes.
And, listening to your stories, seeing how you were informed back in the 60s, to do something political, spending time in Madrid after Franco and all of that. Do you see that was an influence?
Oh, no question. I mean, these two, Virginia and my stepmother's brothers, who were both 60s guys. I was a little kid, and then I was a teenager. So I heard all these things, and you know how children are with older, they're 10, 15 years older than me. They were kind of like big brothers almost. And so for me, it was just hearing the stories about, Vietnam and the war, and they were going to all the anti-war protests. And my stepmother is very politically active as well, and so was my father. And so they were definitely my, the people my mentors.
Yes, and that carried through,
no question. And also, my mother struggled so hard. My mother had a lot of different difficulties, and and then laden on those were 4 children. She worked full time, and she had some major difficulties. So it was very hard. She used to joke about how she had a boyfriend down in the basement where she did the laundry. We lived in a little teeny house, and she just always worked. She was doing the laundry when she got home, and she was so I wanted to help people, but I didn't want to be like my mother, where she was a nurse, and I thought she was so worn out and unhappy when she got home because she was tired, and the work. She was helping people, and I thought that wore her out. But it was just really more her children and her life.
Yes, and also being a state rep, you've got sort of a three-quarter job, I
Yes,
think,
yes.
you know,
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
you're
yeah,
there
yeah.
for a period of time,
Yeah, yeah.
and you're at a very different place in
Yes,
having
yes, yes.
an influence.
No question.
What do you enjoy about it?
Well, I've always loved people. I get a lot of joy out of helping people. I got into politics not because I wanted to be in politics, but because I wanted to help people.
Yeah, right.
For me, it's all about people, and you know, for me, it's about doing good in the world. So I think I've done some, like, climate change. I had the idea for a climate economy solutions conference that the Vermont Council on Rural Development turned into a 3-day summit in Burlington, Vermont, that was attended by 500 people. And Assistant Secretary Brady, Deputy Secretary Brady of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, Wendy, said at the pitch session, you know, there were a couple $1 billion worth of, the people that were there were entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. And there were people from California, a lot of East Coast people, of course, but, and there was a pitch session, and one of the most promising renewable energy businesses was selected and given, you know, $1,000 or so. And we also did things where we went around Burlington and we saw all of the amazing things.
Yeah, that are
Vermont
going on, yeah.
has, you know, well, in 2014, 17,000 jobs in renewable energy. So
Yeah.
as a creative person, I've always kind of been able to see the future a little bit in terms of innovation. So bringing innovative ideas to the State House, I think that's one of my fortes. I'm good with people. I think that's another.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in workforce development, job creation, and marketing Vermont. Those are my other top issues.
And you get to bring your individuality to the job, as
Yes,
well as having to work with teams.
Of
you know,
course.
which is a very big deal. Thank you so much, Val. It's
Oh,
wonderful
thank
to
you.
have you
Oh,
on.
thank you very much.
Good
It's-
stories. We kind of went around the globe
I
today.
get both. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for, you know, getting local people into your
Yes,
studio
it's
and
great.
to
It's
tell
great to
stories.
talk
it's
to people
really,
from the
you know,
community.
you never know. Remember Studs Terkel? And I
Yes.
just, I love that. You know,
I know. He
People
is-
say the most, you know.
People have stories.
People have
and
stories.
we like to listen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Val.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Thanks to all of you for tuning in today. We're really glad you are here with us, and tune in again next week. We will be here.